Yesterday's celebration in Gaza of surrounding the release of the remains of four Israeli hostages, uh, three of whom were assumed to be the Bibas family. One was the other was Oded Lifshitz. The Bibas family being Kfir, the baby who was taken when he was 6 months old, and Ariel was taken when he was I believe 3 or 4 years old, and after many hours after they were returned to Israel, uh, forensic examination came in, and the baby, the children were who Hamas said they were. The body that Hamas claimed was the body of the mother, Shiri, was not the body of the mother or of any hostage. It was just a body of a dead body of a woman. Um, yeah, that is one of the things that Hamas sprung on Israel yesterday. Another thing that happened shortly before the results came in of the examination of the bodies was that there were four explosions around the Tel Aviv area in buses. Explosions meant, of course, to murder Jews. Hamas and Tulkarm took responsibility, but it's not 100% clear that it's them or who it is. But what is clear is that it is the Palestinians. It is some Palestinian organization or another. Um, yeah, Israel immediately issued a statement after both these things happened, saying they will continue with the ceasefire as planned, at least for tomorrow, when six living hostages are expected to be returned. I would be very surprised if after that Israel does what needs to be done and levels Gaza, or does part of what needs to be done and ends the ceasefire and resumes fighting. But yeah, Hamas is doing its thing and certainly winning the war on every level and every aspect imaginable, and winning that war because Israel doesn't want to win. It wants Hamas to win, at least in terms of judging their actions. That is the only conclusion one can come to. Why is this being allowed? I don't know. By the way, another thing that came from the forensic examination is we've seen a lot of really despicable people, even some of the worst people we occasionally see in our chat, say, well, how exactly did they die? Was it an Israeli bombing? As if morally that would change who was responsible for it. Well, we now know how they died. They were strangled to death, then their dead bodies were mauled to make it look like it was something else. And remember, and this should always be we should always remind people of this when we talk about the Bibas family. They were not taken by Hamas. They were taken by random Palestinian so-called civilians. So when people tell you about women and children, those are the people who took the Bibas family. Those are the people who murdered those babies with their own hands in November of 2023. Welcome to the Daily Objective. I'm Razi Ginzberg. I'm joined by James Valliant. James.
This is really one of those grim moments that we have to discuss things like forensic evidence, like you just indicated. And forgive me if I am a little emotional because it is pretty ghastly what we're talking about here. Of course, Hamas lied. They said it was an IDF bombing. Of course, Hamas lied. Now we know with forensic evidence that they were not killed in any bombing of any kind. They were killed back in November by, as you pointed out, by hand. They were strangled and beaten and their bodies mutilated. These are babies. One was just months old, another just 3 or 4 years old, as you point out. This was back in November of 2023. And as you say, it really doesn't much matter. But look, what we're talking about are people who should never be believed. Nothing that they say is true. Everything Hamas says is a lie. And get this, these people are perfectly willing. Now, it's hard for Western minds to really wrap their heads around, but these are people perfectly willing to kill with their bare hands little babies. These were not killed, babies were not killed by an IDF bombing, people. I know I shouldn't emphasize that, but it does reveal something pretty despicable about the moral inversion that the moral perversion that this entire discussion involves. These are people perfectly willing to kill with their bare hands little babies. And after they've been taken hostage, mind you, about a month later, they were killed with bare hands, these little babies. And now we find out that their mother, the body of the mother, which we were promised, is not that of the mother. In fact, it's not that of any Israeli or Jewish victim or any other victim, as far as we can tell, of Hamas. They might have just taken one of their own bodies that died of whatever cause, we don't know. But the point is, they lied. Now, why aren't we getting that body? They said they had that body. They lied about the body. Now, as I was a prosecutor for many years, and maybe this jades my opinion, but I can only think that there is one reason, again, forgive my emotion, I can only think that there is one reason why they have not given us the body, because there would be a forensic report, as there was on the babies, a forensic report on the mother's body. And so Zeus only knows what horrific atrocities were done to her, or what condition she was in, or what hell she went through. So, and these people, again, are liars. They can't be trusted about anything. And then finally, as you point out, just with respect to the bodies released, forgive me, it's just so evil and despicable. And the moral inversion, I think of the attacks on Israel, that they're engaged in some kind of genocide, when Israel has taken steps unprecedented in the history of all warfare. They move populations so they don't get killed. They warn buildings. They shouldn't warn these buildings before they bomb them, but they warn the building, get out before the bombing happens. Unprecedented steps to protect so-called civilians. And now these Palestinians, and as you point out, not necessarily Hamas at all. They were taken by ordinary, quote, Palestinians from Gaza. And within a month, the babies were killed by hand. These are people who have a genocidal intent. These are people who are intensely motivated by such evil hatred that they can kill babies with their bare hands and continue to blame the other guy for it. That is how evil Hamas is. That is just the kind of moral perversion of the discussion that goes on in this entire matter. And then you point out, again, that, and look at the attempted terrorist attacks in Israel that just happened recently, but for, there are sharp-eyed people and we get lucky, but for some sharp-eyed people and a little luck, a bunch more civilians, women and children on buses. We're talking targeted at civilians. Now, okay, it's likely Hamas, but I don't care. It's Palestinian terrorism, more terrorism directed at Israeli civilians. These people are evil. Their culture is evil. The standard line that the BBC and the New York Times shove down our throats is that morally perverse, ladies and gentlemen. This is a despicable atrocity. And think about it. These people are so animated by their racist hatred of Jews, by their mystically founded hatred of civilization, that they are perfectly capable of killing babies already in their custody with their bare hands. Forgive my emotion, but ladies and gentlemen, to continue with a ceasefire under these circumstances would be, okay, I'll give you the time to get out maybe the next batch of hostages in the next 24 hours. But this ceasefire has been violated in the most horrific way that I could possibly imagine. We still haven't gotten the body of that mother, because Lord knows what they did to her when she was in captivity. But these monsters, these animals, are perfectly capable of killing babies with their bare hands and blaming the victims, the IDF, for doing it. Ladies and gentlemen, the entire discussion and all these trolls in our discussions and all the, as I say, Western media outlets that talk about Israeli genocide and Israeli war crimes. No, ladies and gentlemen, if the forensic reports from October 7th itself don't tell you, all these people saying, no, babies weren't killed. These weren't, all that is a media lie. That's all an Israeli lie or a Zionist lie. No. We have more evidence. The forensic reports from October 7th are accurate, by the way. Babies were burned, bodies were mutilated, people were raped. Now look at the forensic report on these babies. Not killed in any IDF bombing, but killed by monsters with their bare hands killing babies. That's how despicably evil these people are. This culture is, this ideology is, and how perverse the Western narrative, media narrative is when it comes to morally evaluating this entire situation. Please forgive my emotion, but
I
this
mean,
ceasefire has been violated in the most despicable way you can think of it, of violating any ceasefire. And it's no longer, I mean, I know Trump, in my mind, I'm very disappointed that he didn't mean something active when he said, all hell will break loose on Saturday. But it's all now on Netanyahu's lap. He is responsible if this ceasefire is held any longer. No, the Hamas must be destroyed. This culture must be destroyed. We must inflict far greater suffering on the Palestinian people. As you point out, these are ordinary Palestinians who took these hostages. And for all I know, ordinary Palestinians who strangled and beat these babies to death back in November of 2023. It is
uh,
that evil, ladies and gentlemen.
yeah, I mean, in terms of Trump, his deadline, his noon deadline on Saturday, I that is as far as I want a U.S. president to go. I mean, Netanyahu, that is the moment where he should have called his bluff. You said all hell will break loose. Look, we flattened Gaza, half of Gaza, some of Gaza. We killed the numbers that the Hamas accuses us of killing.
Flames.
We killed that in a day. Okay, you said all hell. That is all hell breaking loose. Call his bluff. So this is that is on Netanyahu. And again, Netanyahu does not have the Biden won't let me excuse anymore. That's gone. It is on Israel. Look, Yarden Bibas, the father of the children and the husband of Shiri, wanted the details to come out. The details of how his kids were killed because he wanted people to understand what kind of monsters there are. These people are, and look, anybody who didn't know, you didn't need the forensic reports from October 7th. Anybody can say, "Oh, this is Israeli propaganda." Of course, anything that comes out of Israel, the pro Palestinian side will say is Israeli propaganda. But you had enough of Hamas's propaganda on October 7th, which is them showing themselves doing these kinds of things. They showed it because this is what their audience loves. They showed themselves slaughtering innocents and people took to the streets in London and in New York to celebrate it. That's what happened there. By the way, a couple of other things. The bombings yesterday happened at 9 p.m. They accidentally, from reports that I've read, accidentally programmed them from 9 p.m. instead of 9 a.m. Had they succeeded or had they not made that mistake, probably hundreds would have died. 9 a.m. is rush hour. It's a Friday, which is kind of a half a day off, but there would have been many, many people killed, and Israel would have responded differently to exactly the same thing. Four bombs or four buses being bombed, and Israel would have responded very differently. So Israel lets the Palestinians do their thing, and only when they succeed, it does a little bit of pushback, and clearly nowhere near enough. I wanted to also mention, I don't know if I mentioned this, but uh, after in response to Israel's saying that this wasn't Shiri Bibas, Hamas um, said that maybe remains of different people got mixed up and demanded the return of the body of the Gazan who was killed in a Zionist bombing. So this is pro-Palestinian people. This is what you support. I mean, I don't have to tell you. You know what you really want. What you really want is those bombs to go off at the right time. You want October 7th style attacks to be repeated. You want babies to be strangled. Otherwise, you would not support the people who do this. Thank you, Bonnie, for the super chat. Thank you, Alexis, for the super chat. Alexis says, what kind of sadistic psychopath resorts to murdering babies? yeah, and it is a society of sadistic psychopaths, and that is their entire culture is that. And until we realize that and decide to declare war on the Palestinians, this will continue forever.
That is exactly correct. What these atrocities, both on October 7th and now, reveal is the depth of irrationality, the depth of violent racist hatred that we're looking at in so-called Palestinian culture. I mean, a Palestinian is really, in my mind, defined primarily by wanting to destroy Israel and kill Jews. I mean, what unites, quote, Palestinians really? But that certainly no meaningful national or ethnic claim, which would be collectivist in any case, in my view. But it is the culture. It is this culture, is savage, brutal, mystically based, anti-life hating culture. You ask what kind of monstrous psychology could be behind atrocities like this. It is the depth, as I say, Western minds, it's really hard for decent people to wrap their heads around. But there are people that evil in this world who are perfectly happy to kill babies with their bare hands in this cause. And what kind of cause could be worth that? No, no, no. And more than that, ladies and gentlemen, the United Nations, through UNRWA, has been educating Palestinian children in the wonderful glories of martyring yourself in the cause of killing Jews and destroying Israel. That's what they're taught, and taught with Western money through the UN. That's what's been going on. It is this culture. It is a culture that makes that possible, that is our enemy and is the enemy of civilization, Razi. When you have a culture like that, it is Israel's responsibility. Israel was attacked. They have the primary responsibility. But surely every civilized mind on this planet, every civilized heart on this planet should be moved and should realize that this culture represents an existential threat to civilization as such. We should, rather than condemning Israel, every nation in the world should be joining in and helping Israel do everything they can to take out and utterly destroy for all time Hamas, Hezbollah, all of their affiliates, and the monsters who pay for them, pay for these atrocities in Tehran.
Yoav says in the chat, I'm not pro-peace anymore. I am very much pro-peace. And for there to be peace, peace as in, at the very least, the absence of war, the absence of this danger, Palestinianism needs to be defeated. I mean, look, we think of peace in kind of a in the way that it's been presented to us by leaders in Israel and the US mostly over the past few decades. As in, Israel gives something, and the people who say clearly all we want is to kill all Israelis supposedly say we'll have peace with you. This is the peace. October 7th was the result of that supposed peace. Now, peace has an actual meaning, which is not these savages get rewarded for slaughtering innocents. And that is what I'm for. I'm for, first of all, defining terms and then using them correctly. And then, yes, supporting things like peace, peace through victory, victory, and you know, that would mean in this case killing many people in Gaza and the West Bank and sending the rest elsewhere. James, I know you disagree with me on that last point, but yeah, there certainly can't be any idea of any Palestinian state, of course, or any sort of self-governing body, including the kind of self-governing that supposedly just takes care of internal affairs. No, we know what they use that kind of power for, and it can't ever ever happen again.
Yeah, I am, I'm reaching a point where maybe removing them from even the area, sounds attractive. Foisting them on other countries that are sympathetic with them doesn't sound like such a bad idea anymore to me. So much, but primarily when it comes to Gaza, it should be Israel. You know, these people belong in prison as a culture. Okay, the sight unseen A Palestinian, as far as I'm concerned, is a threat to Israel right now. These were, as you point out, ordinary Palestinians who did this, and they don't distinguish themselves. They don't wear uniforms. They're very much supported by their population. These people are not fit to govern themselves. They need, in effect, to be marshaled, herded about like the animals that they are. And I would say principally that's Israel's responsibility because they're the attacker, they were the victims of this attack. But now I am of a much broader mind on this subject. Perhaps they should be foisted. These animals should be foisted on the populations of neighboring countries, which have been sanctioning them for decades. So I'm open-minded on that point now, Razi. Forced relocation may be the correct answer. But in any case, these animals are not fit to govern themselves. They're not fit
Yeah.
to govern themselves. They should be killed. They should have far more suffering inflicted on them than Israel has come close to inflicting upon them. And they should be marshaled and herded like the animals that they are so that they can't inflict any more damage on innocent civilians.
Yeah, by the
Um,
way, the neighboring countries part of the relocation plan, I'm not a fan of because what you're giving them is a much bigger, many times bigger border than they currently have, and they made it through that border. So, yeah, send them off far and away, and
to a galaxy far, far away,
yeah.
frankly, because they are not fit to govern themselves, and no one should have to put up with them as residents or neighbors. They, as I say, they need to be herded like the animals that they are until they can act like decent, civilized human beings.
Somebody in the chat says the civilians of post-war Germany recognize they supported a murderous demon. The Palestinians will never do the same. First of all, there's no never. I mean, that's the thing. The reason we can morally judge them is because they are human, they have free will, and this is what they choose to do. But no, what needs to be done is to not allow such a society to exist, which means not allow their education system to exist and not allow them to indoctrinate. Look, a 6-month-old Israeli. This is when we hear people saying, both sides. The one time this can be valid is a 6-month-old Israeli baby and a 6-month-old Gazan baby are the same. They are both identically innocent morally. They're exactly the same. And in both cases, and I'm sure there are many who died in Gaza in this war, in both cases, the responsibility is on the savages who did this. So yeah, if a 6-month-old baby is taken from Gaza and being brought up by civilized people, he will not become most likely he will not become a terrorist, or there's no more chance of him becoming a terrorist than a Jewish baby being raised by civilized people. So let's remember that, yeah, they do have, they do have free will, and that is what makes them evil. A lion that mauls a human being is not morally, is not evil. Um, yeah.
Well, that's exactly it. And that's why they can't govern themselves. They are not fit to educate their own children or raise their own children. That's what it comes down to. But it's a cultural matter, not a racial matter, as you point out. Human beings have free will. They have the potential, at least, for rational thought. And you're right. If a Palestinian kid were raised, in a civilized, in a semi-civilized family, they wouldn't even be able to contemplate the atrocities of October 7th. They wouldn't be able to contemplate the atrocities that happened to these babies or, in all likelihood, their mother. But it is unspeakable. And if facts like this, if incidents like this don't get it through the Western head, it only shows the degree of philosophical perversion in the West, our inability to morally evaluate, the good guys, the bad guys, what needs to happen here. The entire culture sucks. The entire culture of the Palestinians labor under is the enemy. And recognize, as we did with the Nazis, as we did with Japan during World War II, that the culture needs changing. They need to be ruled until they can rule themselves. Their children need to be educated by decent people who don't regard the murder of babies as an appropriate tool of getting what you want in this world. Yeah, that's how far it is, how far gone the Western mind is on this subject. We are incapable. It's worse than incapacity. we look at it through a perverse, it completely inverted moral lens. Israel is the bad guy. Netanyahu is the war criminal. He's the one engaged in genocide. This is Israel's the apartheid state. Wait. This, if incidents like this, or I would have thought October 7th, 2023 would have made that lesson perfectly clear. But look at this as just the latest, ladies and gentlemen. Think of it. There are people in this world capable of killing babies with their bare hands who are already weeks in your custody. Now think of it. Think of the psychology that that implies. Think of how dangerous they are as a population, as a culture. People who could do this are dangers to civilization as such. They're like criminals. They're like the worst kind of. Think of Jack the Ripper. I've said this, I made this comparison after October 7th. But what we're looking at is a culture of Jack the Rippers. You know, Jack the Ripper was a notorious mutilation serial killer of prostitutes in London in the late 19th century. He was an isolated individual, of course, and isolated individual psychotics happen in any culture and will happen from time to time, unfortunately. There is such a thing as mental illness, and there are philosophically corrupt evil people too. But we're looking at with Hamas and Gaza is an entire culture of Jack the Rippers, perfectly willing to mutilate people as they kill them, kill babies with their bare hands. That's the kind of evil, the depth of evil we're talking about, a culture of Jack the Rippers. It must be brought to an end.
I don't know if I mentioned, but we started a bit early. We're gonna go over a bit. Yeah. So one thing to remember is that in the month or so between when they were taken and when they were strangled to death, uh, people would put up posters. If you remember, the posters of missing of of hostages being taken, put them up around in places around the world, and you would see them being torn down everywhere. Torn down. There are places where people drew swastikas on Fir and Ariel. This is and this is a big part of society in the West today. And we compare this often to World War II because I think it's a valid comparison. And the Nazis, first of all, yeah, there was no live streaming in the 30s and 40s of the previous century, but they didn't use the equivalent or whatever technology was available to advertise what they're doing to Jews because, in part, it would have made it more difficult for them when it came to how people around the world see them and what they decide to do. Here, the Palestinians did that, and they got these people out on the streets, celebrating the murder of babies, celebrating the murder of babies. Then, when Israel started responding, they talked about women and children as if they were the only ones being killed in Gaza, as if this is Israel's fault, and as if they are on principle opposed to the killing of women and children, while celebrating the killing and the hostage taking of women and children. And imagine this in World War II. Imagine people taking to the streets, celebrating how the Jews are finally getting what they deserve. If the Nazis had broadcasted to the world what they were doing, celebrating. This is what we are seeing. This is what we are seeing in Western society today, in every Western country. And this, again, when people ask me, why do you cover this every day? This is why we cover this every day. This is happening not far away. This is happening in our countries, in our cities. It's happening where I am. It's happening where James is. It's happening where every one of our viewers is, whether or not you're in the Middle East. And this is why we will continue to cover it.
Boy, what a great point you made there. Think of I mean, if what Hamas is doing and has done, and what ordinary Palestinians in Gaza are doing, and Palestinians in Israel still attempting to bomb buses, as recently as within the last few hours, still trying to get at innocent civilians. Okay, think about the Western mind with no excuse. These Western university students tearing down or marking over the posters of hostages. So you put up a poster of a hostage, like the Bibas family. You put them up, they're tearing them down. Think of the mentality. Think how perverse the Western culture, our Western culture has become, that we even, that especially at places like universities, especially at places like universities. In countries like the United Kingdom or the United States, there are large groups of people who have absolutely no compunction about tearing down the hostage posters. Now, think about that. That is a total sanctioning, a literal whitewashing in some cases, or red washing, or swastika washing of the atrocities that are being committed. These people will go to bat for baby killers. The people in the West who go to bat for baby killers. That's how perverse Western culture has become, ladies and gentlemen. That's how much we need to look in the mirror and consider. And you're right. Think of it. I mean, from Australia to NYU and Columbia to London parks, what do we hear? We hear globalized intifada, bring back the gas chambers. We see swastikas. We see, yes, we see a hatred, the same kind of collectivist hatred of the Jews that has infected the West. It's not limited to these savages that we call the Palestinians, but these animals, and that's really all they are, is animals, cannot be permitted to govern themselves. They must be rounded up, herded up, and treated like the animals they are. Now, I'm not saying atrocities, but I'm saying they don't have any right to govern themselves or educate their own children. They absolutely do not. And we need to get our act together in the West to the extent that we recognize that and have the moral clarity to say that out loud. This culture is evil. The culture that dominates what we call Palestinians is evil. And our culture, insofar as it sanctions it, is perverse and completely inverted. These are philosophical matters, ladies and gentlemen. Only morality, only philosophy can answer these questions and give you that kind of clarity. Otherwise, you'll be arguing by pictures and arguing by slogans and so forth. And what you end up doing is covering up and whitewashing these atrocities because of your morally twisted view in the West. Your morally twisted view, I would say, New York Times, BBC, say your morally twisted view sanctions this. That is really the fuel behind all of this. Because if the Palestinians, so-called Palestinians, didn't think they would have that kind of moral support in the West and internationally, they probably wouldn't even try to get away. No civilized, not, even if you were such an animal, no civilized world would put up with it. They know that we no longer live in a civilized world. They know that we would put up with their baby killings and their mutilations and their rapes and their taking of innocent hostages. And they were right. And they were right. Major voices in the West are perfectly willing to go to bat and whitewash their deeds and put the blame on Israel for existing, for just existing, for being the most civilized nation in the region. And they're the bad guys. Now, ladies and gentlemen, only a correct philosophy can understand this. And that is why we constantly come back to Ayn Rand's philosophy, a philosophy for living on earth, as she called it, a philosophy that puts life first, a philosophy that says reason is our only way to understand these things, a philosophy that says every individual has rights. When someone violates those rights, to that extent, they lose their own. And what we have here is a culture that systematically violates rights and are unwilling to live in peace with other people. That is a culture that needs to be destroyed.
Yeah, and
Stop.
when Muslim preachers say we love death more than you love life, unfortunately, they are right as a culture, and that is what we need to change and need to remember to love life to the point that the people who want to take it away are not able to do so by whatever means necessary when it comes to removing the threat. Wonder Freeman says in the chat that Douglas Murray said that the Germans had to get very drunk every evening to get over what they had done in the day. They knew and were ashamed. I don't know about that. Look, if they were ashamed, that's not enough. But they got what they deserved. You know, they died. Many of them died. And their culture, to the extent that it allowed that kind of those kinds of ideas to flourish, was destroyed. Palestinians are the world is making excuses for them that they won't make for themselves. And yeah, this is and this is
Oh,
a sure way to lose.
Yeah, no, maybe there were, guards at Auschwitz who had to get drunk. I can imagine. I mean, I couldn't imagine not even contemplating being there to help out and be sober in any kind of way. And I'll tell you this too. The German culture had a resistance. There were people who tried to kill Hitler. There were people who tried to kill his top. There was a German resistance. There were Germans who were outraged by it. Where are the so-called Palestinians who are outraged by this? No, they celebrate it. They celebrate it, ladies and gentlemen. They party. They pop the champagne corks and they, throw confetti. This is a time to celebrate and party, as far as they're concerned. So there isn't, you're absolutely right. There was a decent segment of European population, German population, Bavarian and Prussian population that just didn't like Hitler. Where is that? Where is even that among the so-called Palestinians? No, this entire culture is, you're right, in one sense, much worse. It is much more deeply depraved. It is much more savage. It is much more disconnected in the sense that it involves the entire, as far as I can tell, the entire population, or nearly the entire population that we call Palestinian. That is a distinction with Germans. There were some decent Germans who tried to help Jews get out of the situation. There were decent Germans who tried to kill Hitler. There were decent Germans who were giving information to the Allies during the war. Where the hell are those among the Palestinians today?
Yeah, they don't exist except in the minds of some people in the West. Yeah, we're not, you're not blocked by us, but sometimes YouTube doesn't allow some comments through. I don't know what the rules are. James, you mentioned the BBC. Tomorrow on the Daily Objective, we're going to talk about this BBC documentary that the BBC has already taken down, but was up for a few days. I don't remember the name. I'll look it up, but it was basically looking at the devastation in Gaza through the eyes of three innocent children, which of course that's news. That's how you report the news. Now, it turns out that one of them was the son of a senior figure in Hamas. Another one had some serious Hamas connections. This may have been produced pretty much by Hamas, and so in a sense, those of us in the UK who are paying our TV license are essentially maybe direct, not just paying for Hamas propaganda in the West, maybe directly paying for the bombs that are put on buses. Bear that in mind.
Ah, British taxpayer, think about that. Think about that.
Yeah.
Your yeah, Western money is now going in, and Western eyes are now going to see this documentary. And think about that. On your dime, British taxpayer or television license subscriber, on your dime, that is how perverse the Western analysis of all of this is. That is how far low we have sunk. Now, obviously, it's still not quite as bad as the people who could actually kill babies with their bare hands. Okay, I'm not going to accuse BBC of being capable of that, but they are perfectly capable of whitewashing the people and the culture and demonizing the forces that are trying to fight that. That's how far the West is sunk.
Yeah, and for more on how far the West has sunk, the reality show follows right after this show. The title of it is Elon Musk versus Vladimir Zelensky. Yeah, we have sunk in many ways, unfortunately, and yeah, that is certainly the only way in which this is not even funny, but the only way in which it's good is for those of us who create content about bad things
Uh,
in the
Trump,
culture and
uh,
politics.
the entire Trump, just one comment, the entire Trump administration's recent assertions on Ukraine are despicable. Absolutely. Talk about how far the West has sunk, that America can blame the victim of an invasion, and that's exactly what's going on. Ukraine is the war zone, but they need to have elections. Not Putin. He's not the dictator. He was the invader, and yet Trump can get it completely backwards. Again, a case of clear moral inversion. And ladies and gentlemen, the only answer to understanding the world through a correct moral lens is by getting our philosophy straight. Let me recommend the works of Ayn Rand. They are what defend reason, civilization, human life. And if that's what your values are, that Ayn Rand is the answer. The world has sunk to a place where we defend aggressors and call them the victims, and we call the victims the aggressors simply because they were considering joining NATO, say, and that's a reasonable provocation, according to Mr. Trump. Can you think of anything more evil? No, NATO membership is only a provocation to a would-be invader. And it's despicable, the more kind of moral inversion that we're getting from Washington, D.C. these days, not to mention, of course, Westminster and all of the media in the West. But yeah, I think you can tell I'm a little upset today because the
Yeah.
foreign news for me as an American has been heart-wrenching.
Well, look, we will keep covering it with the hope that somebody who can actually change what they're doing is listening, and if not, in the short run, hopefully there is a long run. Thanks, James. Thanks everybody for watching. The reality show starts in a couple of minutes.